I'm going to begin by sharing a luminescence poem by Mark Bellatini. Mark was the minister in Columbus, Ohio for many years until he retired just a couple of years ago. And it's a poem in 5 parts. I'm going to share the other parts throughout the sermon. Part 1. Light before us, sign the light beyond us. Alpha Centauri, Regal, Deneb, Antares, Tau Ceti. Great lengths of time condensed into small flickers in the night. Great wheels of stars that is our home. You move, yet we don't feel it. You are bright, but our city lights too often blot you out. Illumine, O living sign before us, the pathway to humility, that we may know we are on the edge, not at the center, that we may know our limits and turn off from all self-congratulation. In fiction, as in real life, light wards off darkness. In science fiction or fantasy, you often have a magical source of light, or a high-tech one. For one thing, it keeps the characters from constantly having to make torches and sit around trying to get a spark with some flint, which can make for boring reading. So in Harry Potter, one of the first things the young wizards at wizarding school learn to do with their wands is to say lumos and have a light appear. Voila, instant magical flashlight. In The Lord of the Rings, the magical light is the phial of Galadriel, a vial of water from a fountain that holds the light of a preserved star. You uncork it, voila, instant flashlight. Science fiction is usually a little less fancy than that because basically we invented flashlights already, so while the flashlight might look futuristic or be attached to a suit or something, it's basically still a flashlight. An exception might be lightsabers, which are weapons, but can also be used as a light source. Why I mention this? In fiction, as is often the case in our rhetoric in the world that we live in, darkness is also a metaphor for evil. We say that people had dark intentions or that their souls were black. In fact, this metaphor was in many eras expanded to encompass skin tone and used as a rationalization for slavery or racism writ large. But while that was an unjust application, a fear of the night, of darkness that comes when your light is extinguished, this is a natural fear for humans who rely on a sense of sight more than our other senses and who are more vulnerable to dangers in the dark. So with darkness as a metaphor for evil and fantastical worlds, the light pushes back the darkness in a more literal way. So in The Lord of the Rings, that phial of Galadriel is used by the hero Frodo to resist also the temptation that comes with the carrying of the ring, the one ring to rule them all. It presents to him a temptation to slide into possession of the ring and use the ring for power, and the light gives him some measure of a relief from that temptation. It's also used by him to literally ward off attacks. In Harry Potter, the wands also emit a special kind of light called a Patronus, which is an animal spirit seen in light form. In the books, they're often described as silvery and mist-like, but in the movies, they look like an animal made out of light. And these forces are the only forces that can ward off the darkest of creatures, the Dementors, which will literally suck your soul. And then in science fiction, we get the use of light warding off evil in a much more visceral and direct way with the lightsaber, a Jedi's weapon that uses the light side of the Force against the dark side of the Force directly by using it in battle. Part 2 by Mark Bellatini. Light before us, shine the light around us. Dear friends and beloved family members, teachers and those who affirm kindness with their lives, let their stories unpack and embody wisdom. Let the memories and insights they share with us tether to the ages past to the present. Illumine, O living sign before us, the pathway to community, that we may know we are not alone even when we feel like it, that we may know our interdependence as one with our life breath. Part 2 is a story. I got this version of this what seems to be an older folk tale, from Chicken Soup for the Soul at Work. There's a story by Charles Pagay that I'm going to tell you in my own words right now because I like to adapt it and change it, and folk tales are meant to be living things. So here's my version. A rich merchant was dying, and he called his sons to him, and he told them that one of them would inherit his business, except for the 10% he was giving to his church, of course. To decide who was the worthy candidate, he gave each a gold coin and told them to come back the next day with something that would fill the room from corner to corner, all 8 corners and in between, and come back the next day. So his sons went off with their money into the world. When the sons came back the next day, the father asked them each in turn what they had gotten. And the first son said, "Father, I went to the marketplace, and I invested some of the money in projects that I thought would bring greater hope. And then I bought these 2 pillows." And he ripped open the feather pillows, and he waved the pillowcases around, and feathers flew all over the room, settling down. But of course, they did not entirely fill the room, not to the corners of the ceiling and all the space in the middle of the air. But the father was impressed with this answer and with the investment that his son had made in the future. And so the father asked the second son what he had gotten with his gold coin. And the son said, "Well, I went to our neighbor's farm and I discovered that he is struggling. And so I offered him, out of friendship, to invest in his farm, hoping that his future and our friendship would grow. And he gave me these 2 bales of hay. And he cut open the twine of the hay bales and tossed the hay around the room, and it spread all around the room and settled over the feathers, and everybody sneezed. But the room was not filled, not to all of its 8 corners and the space in between." The father was impressed, though, with this answer, with his son's act of friendship as well. And then his father asked the third son what he had gotten with his gold coin. "Well," said the third son, "I first went to the marketplace too, like my brother, and there I saw a homeless man. He was hungry and cold and asked me for some help. And so I gave him the whole coin, hoping that love and caring might grow. He thanked me, and in exchange he gave me these." And he held out in his hand a small stub of a used candle and a single match. The son lit the candle, and light filled the entire room from corner to corner and all the space in between, floor to ceiling. And the father turned to his third son and said, "Well done, my son. You've learned the act of generosity. You also learned to let your light shine." And while all the sons were good men and all were deserving, he left his business to his third son. And because that's the kind of man he was, and because he loved his brothers, the third son shared it with his brothers. That's my part there at the end. I'll tell you, the part about giving to the church was in there, though. Part 3 by Mark Bellatini. "Light before us, shine the light beside us. Those strangers we have not met, but only see from the corners of our heart. Let the possibilities for refreshment and surprise they represent open any closed-off walls we have built, and bid the fears that bind us back to remove ourselves. Illumine, O living sign before us, the pathway to vulnerability, that we may know that we are not yet complete, that we may know the path does not end because it curves." I like that part about the path not ending because it curves, because it harkens back to that arc of justice that Theodore Parker talked about, that Martin Luther King picked up, and that's been used by so many since, that says, the arc, I can only follow it with my eye a small ways, but I know it bends towards justice. So we've taken in our faith a singular symbol, and the symbol of the flaming chalice. It's an icon we use as our religious symbol. We light the chalice at the beginning of every service. We talk about, when we light it, the symbolism of light, what metaphors that light holds for us. Sometimes we talk about the light of knowledge, sometimes the fire of commitment, the spark of justice, the warmth of community. And at the end of the service, we extinguish our chalice, and we talk about taking that flame symbolically with us into the world to build that which we think is good, is light, to defeat what we see as dark, as evil in the strongest terms. This flame, to us, it's a symbol, yes, but it's a singular symbol that stands for all of our principles at once. It stands for the inherent worth and dignity of all people, for justice and equity and compassion in human relations, for the search for truth and meaning, for the goal of world community with peace for all, and it stands for the interdependent web of which we are a part. We speak of it as our beacon sometimes, a pun because the UUA used to be on Beacon Hill in Boston. It's also a beacon that harkens back to Jesus' words in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, when he says, after all the blesseds are the, Jesus says this, "You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people hide a lamp and put it under a bushel. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." This is the part of the gospel that this little light of mine song comes from. Hide it under a bushel? No, I'm going to let it shine. That part about the city on the hill is a phrase used by Puritan preacher John Winthrop as a symbol of our country, of what it can become, the symbol for America, that we will become someday that shining city on a hill, a symbol woven into our country's tapestry, words echoed also by President Kennedy and Reagan and Obama. And my favorite quote using the light of the world and city on the hill image is actually from George W. Bush, because he said, "Like generations before us, we have a calling from beyond the stars to stand for freedom. This is the everlasting dream of America." I like that he takes the light that we have and turns it into starlight, calling us from the great beyond. The light we carry, the light from this chalice, this is the light that we bend towards justice. We are called from the stars, from the cosmos, or from God, to use this light to build that shining city on the hill. I believe we're called to do that in this life. Part 4 by Mark Bellatini. Light before us, shine the light that gleams in the eyes of poets and prophets. Rumi and Mirabai, the sons of Mary and Siddhartha, Olympia Brown and Gandhi, Shakespeare and Maya Angelou, Martin Luther King, Harvey Milk, Sojourner Truth. Black Elk, Banjao, Gabrielle Mistral, the vast company of multinational wise. Let their insights enlarge our own with challenge and inspiration, and draw us towards depth, not the surface. Illumine, O living sign before us, the pathway to gratitude, that we may know they share the gifts of all wisdom everywhere, that they may all thank the sacred ground from which the present moment grows and blossoms. Now, obviously, I am a social gospel preacher. For me, it always comes back to loving this world, doing justice, and building the beloved community. But maybe for you, the call of your inner light is different, and that's okay. It might be that your calling is to build intentional spiritual practice, to deepen your spirit and your connection with the divine and the spirit of others and their connection. It might be that your spirit is called to build relationships to strengthen families, both your own and others. Many of us here are teachers in spirit, called to use our spark of knowledge to deepen the knowledge of others. Maybe your thing, your calling, your spark is about intentional acts of kindness, being more kind, as Don Tassi puts it, or simple acts of kindness, as others have said. Whatever that spark is, whatever it calls you to do to live out your values and our principles in this world, think about how you let it shine, how it reflects out of you and bends this world with its presence. Part 5 by Mark Bellatini. Light before us, shine the light within us. The wisdom so often stronger than eternal shoulds and don'ts, the lean silence inside us that nevertheless speaks and even proclaims. Let the faithfulness of our inward intuition be our anchor in stormy weather, and our steadfast comfort when the babble of the world's thousand voices confuses us, crosses us, yanks at our serenity, and pushes our buttons. Illumine, O living sign before us, the pathway to confidence, that our faith is placed first and foremost in ourselves, in order that our faithfulness to the primacy of justice and love might be rooted in our native strength. So today, we've talked about the light within us and the diversity of light, the light within each and every person. We've talked about turning the light inward to inward reflection and to bending the light, refocusing it as we bend the arc towards justice and love. And we talked about recommitting to the work of the world. So the question before us as we celebrate luminescence is, what do you do with your spark, your light, your Patronus, your lightsaber, your lantern, your small candle stub? How do you take your faith, kindled here in community, and live it out day by day in the larger world? In her poem titled What I Have Learned So Far, the poet Mary Oliver writes, and I'll conclude with these words of hers: meditation is old and honorable, so why should I not sit every morning of my life on the hillside looking into the shining world? Because, properly attended to, delight as well as havoc is suggestion. Can one be passionate about the just, the ideal, the sublime, and the holy, and yet commit to no labor in its cause? I don't think so. All summations have a beginning. All effect has a story. All kindness begins with the sown seed. Thought buds towards radiance. The gospel of light is the crossroads of indolence or action. Be ignited or be gone. Be ignited or be gone. Our closing hymn is number 1028 in your teal hymnals, The Fire of